Hello everyone, welcome to today's presentation, Functional Autism Awareness. We have a lot to cover today, so I want to just jump right in here. We're going to start with the disclaimer. This presentation is designed for educational purposes only and is not engaged in rendering medical advice, legal advice, or professional services. If you feel that you have a medical problem, you should seek the advice of your physician or healthcare practitioner. Welcome again, everyone. I want to congratulate all of you for being here today and taking those steps to getting your health and especially your child's health moving forward. I absolutely love supporting others who are looking to improve their health holistically and naturally, and especially in the case of autism, where there are so many factors underneath the surface and things that we can do to address those behind the scenes, functions going on from a natural perspective. So we're going to be sharing all that, quickly, but I first want to get into who is this for? Because, we want to make sure that you guys are in the right place. So this is for those who are seeking natural ways to address health challenges such as autism. Those who are tired of that give me a pill approach, and those who are tired of those symptom management approaches, and those who are looking to find the actual answer as to why is this happening? What is going on inside my child biochemically? And on the flip side of that, who this is not for. This is not for someone who's just saying, hey, I need to know what supplements do I need to take or use. While we are certainly going to cover supplements, this is not a one-size-fits-all protocol. So if you're looking for something that's very simple, easy, again, this is not going to be for you. You're going to be very disappointed in what all I have to say, because this is definitely going to be challenging. So we need to make sure that, if you're looking for those simple, easy solutions, probably not going to, this presentation is probably not for you. And this is also not for those who think that we can just put whatever into our bodies in an unnatural way and it's not going to cause a negative reaction. So if any of those things sound like you, again, you're probably going to be pretty frustrated with this presentation, and you might as well go ahead and tune out now. So if you guys have any questions along the way, make sure you guys can message me. You can connect me on Facebook or message me, and I will try to get to those. So what is it we're going to cover today? We are going to cover, first off, what is autism and Asperger's? And what does it mean to approach these things functionally? That's kind of one of the latest buzzwords we have now, is this functional medicine. So what is that? What does that mean? We're going to cover nutrition, supplements, activity, and detoxing. And then what are your next steps? What do we do with all of this information? We all know that autism is on the rise. It's gone from back when I was a child, it was like 1 in 10,000. Now it's down to like 1 in 35, 1 in 33, 1 in 34, depending on which report you look at. This is extremely disturbing, and there is a problem. And the way that we fix this problem is with you and me. It starts with us. The system is not going to fix the problem because the system is creating the problem. So if we want to change this train wreck and we want to stop this runaway train, we've got to get off of it, and we need to do something about it. So the responsibility lies in our hands as parents to do that. And it's not just in autism. I know today we're going to talk pretty much focus on autism, but it's not just autism. Like the new child in the US, 1 in 3 of these are overweight. It just is crazy, the astronomical rising of these chronic illnesses and these diseases and these labels that our children are being given. Over 50% of our children have a chronic disease, and over half of them have more than one. So this is a terrible epidemic, and it's for the first time in history that our younger generation is actually sicker than us and their parents. And, it goes back to, remember when autism was 1 in 10,000, now it's like 1 in 30s and 1 in 20s in our boys. And if it keeps going, we're going to be down to this, autism is going to be a common thing that everybody has. So what do we do? Well, we have to rethink what is food, what is medicine, what does disease and genetics, and you may have even heard this term, what is epigenetics? What does all that stuff mean? We have to approach these things differently. If we want a different outcome, then we have to put the different blocks together differently. We can't keep building this the same way and expecting the same thing, something different to happen. It's just not going to happen. So real quick, I want to talk about who it is that I am and why you should listen to me. My name is Selena Rothenberger. I am a functional health practitioner and functional health and wellness coach, and I founded the Functional Perspective. And I'm a mother of 6 where I lost 4 of my children. I have 2 surviving children, one of those with an autoimmune disease. And I specialize in helping those who suffer with gastrointestinal and autoimmune issues learn natural ways of addressing these things so they can regain their health and vitality. So how does autism fit in that? What is autism anyway? So we have this disorder that's now, 1 in the 30s of our children that used to be rather rare. So what is it? Well, there's a couple different definitions of it. So the Autism Speaks defines it as a broad range of conditions that are characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, nonverbal communication, as well as different strengths and weaknesses. We know there's not really a one size fits all like autism. There's this whole, combination of factors that are playing a role, whether it's, genetics or these epigenetics, which is basically everything other than ourselves. And so, it has this pretty big range, or what they call the spectrum. And, that some they consider higher functioning, others are not so higher functioning. And then something like Asperger's, is kind of considered one of the higher functioning on the spectrum. So something else that we're going to talk about is the Aspergers Syndrome. The Aspergers Syndrome is quite often referred to kind of as a subtype of ASD, the autism spectrum disorder. And many consider those, like I said, on the high functioning end of the spectrum. And there's many different, common behaviors that we're going to see between both the autistic and the Asperger type child. A lot of it, when it sides more on the Asperger side, are things such as limited or inappropriate social interactions, robotic or repetitive speech, challenges with nonverbal communication, things like gesture and facial expressions, coupled with an above to average verbal skills. And they have a tendency to discuss self rather than others, and an inability to really understand those social and emotional issues or non-literal phrases. There's a lot of lack of eye contact or reciprocal conversation, obsession with specific, often unusual topics, very one-sided conversations, and sometimes awkward movements and mannerisms. But we have to really look at this, that these are just some symptoms that have all been clustered together and been given this label of Asperger's. So, we have to think about, okay, we have these symptoms and we have this labels, but what does that really mean? Because the disease and these labels are at the end of the equations. They're not the reason why we have the symptoms. They're just a name that's given for these clusters of symptoms and these descriptions of these different disorders, diseases, what have you. So we look at these things, we're taking a functional approach to autism or any of these other, disorders that are in that same category. Well, that means we're going to start asking the question, why? What is going on? We have these symptoms that seem to be very common. Then why is the body expressing in that way? What is causing the body to express in that way? What pathways are naturally going to express in that way when there's a disruption? These things don't just pop up out of nowhere. They are a natural immune response to our body. These diseases are actually our body fighting some sort of a battle, and then it's expressing this way because there's a war zone going on inside. So what is it? We have to go back up to the end of the equation. So functional medicine approaches for any of these things in ASD, we're going to take into account these different imbalances throughout the body. And these things are going to include things such as excessive inflammation. We're going to look at gluten and dairy intolerances, especially. We see a lot of that going on in the spectrum. Processed and refined foods. We're going to see how are these things playing a role in these symptoms that are manifesting. We're also going to look at things like digestive upsets, malnutrition, genetics, and toxins. All these things work together and they all overlap with one another. So if there's a disruption in one, a lot of times there's going to be a disruption in another, or one of these is going to cause a greater disruption in another. It's going to have a compounding effect. So we're going to go through these today, pretty much most of these here, and we're going to start with the inflammation, because so many diseases and so many symptoms, really, there's an inflammation issue at the core. And so inflammation under normal conditions, it's a very, very useful mechanism for our body. Our body needs the inflammation to fight whatever it is it's fighting. That's part of its defense system. The problem is whenever the battle doesn't stop, and now the inflammation is ongoing. And this excessive inflammation can have a lot more causes, and it can kind of be self-perpetuating. There's excessive amounts of chronic inflammation that signals our body it's saying, hey, it's in this state of emergency, and that then has lasting damage to our heart, our brain, our joints, all other areas of our body. And we used to think that inflammation was for older people. And, we have things like joints, which is like the arthritis, or we have the heart disease like heartitis, or pain in the gut like gastritis. You know, it's basically saying, hey, the body's immune system is on fire. But guess what? It's not just in the older generation. We are also seeing this in our youth. Like I just said, over half of our children have a chronic disease, or they've been labeled with this disease. That means they have some sort of inflammation going on. So when it comes to this autism area, well, we've got things such as brain inflammation. Did you guys know that that is like one of the main things going on with autism? Brain tissue studies of people on ASD frequently show this widespread amount of inflammation, similar to those that have autoimmune disease. And whenever we stop and think about it, it really actually makes perfect sense, right? Because we have neurotransmitters, while most of them are made in our GI tract, but they are, a lot of the actions take place in our brain. And so if those things aren't working well, there's going to be inflammation. You know, over time, this excessive amount of inflammation is going to keep doing damage to the surrounding cells. And the brain and the gut are the two main players as to where our neurotransmitters are made, and they are one of the biggest areas that are going to have the most amount of inflammation. They're going to be very susceptible to inflammation because there's just so many things that go on in our body between the brain and the gut, with, you know, hormones that are made, neurotransmitters that are made. That's where our food, you know, gets the nutrients passed through. You know, those kinds of things are very susceptible to inflammation because there's going to be, you know, things attacking that. There's just a lot of stuff going on. You've probably even heard of the gut being called our second brain, you know, because of that very tight relationship between the two, and that so many of our hormones are actually made in our GI tract. And then those things get signaled and released in our brain. So what contributes then? So we know that on this foundation, we have inflammation. So the next question we're going to ask is why? We're going to keep asking why. We really need to make sure that we are turning ourselves into that 3-year-old, 2 and 3-year-old child, that young child who's like, why? That is how we get to what is really going on with our inside biochemically. So what contributes to this inflammation? Well, there are so many things that can contribute to inflammation, you know, especially whenever we are looking at things going on in these chronic illnesses, because it becomes that catch-22. So we have to peel back the layers and say, okay, what was some things that originally started, and what are things now that are perpetuating it? You know, so sometimes it's hard to differentiate between the two of them, but this is where we start. So we start with first food allergies and food sensitivities. It's sort of like, you know, we have a fire going on here, and we need to at least stop putting gas on the fire. So looking at the food allergies and food sensitivities is one of the first things that we can do to start helping to calm down that immune response. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we are eliminating things that are going to be problematic. The next thing that we're going to be doing is looking at gut and bacteria imbalances, like what's going on in the gut. How is that imbalanced? Because our bacteria in our gut have a symbiotic relationship with the rest of our body, and all these things work in harmony. So if we have an imbalance in our gut flora where it's too much even of a good thing, can be very, very problematic for our neurotransmitters. And we're going to see things, you know, when it comes to mental health and anxiety, depression, things such as ADHD, autism, all of those sorts of things have a huge relationship to the microbiome. The other things we're going to look at is toxic exposure. You know, this one again, it seems like one of those things that makes common sense. All of these really, when we just take a step back and look at it and we rethink what is food, what is medicine, what's disease, what are these symptoms, what all this stuff means, it actually, all this stuff makes perfect sense. You know, when we have toxins coming in, disrupting the normal processes, we're going to see some sort of collateral damage. So let's break these down just a little bit more. We're going to start with food sensitivities and food allergies. There are several studies which have linked, you know, autism and dairy and gluten, and the negative effects that these things have on the brain. And there's two specific studies that I'm going to talk about here. One is peptides role in autism and peptides from milk casein. So the one thing that we see is so prevalent in autism and ADHD and Aspergers and those kinds of things is a gluten and dairy sensitivity. So that's almost always going to be a recommendation for a child who is experiencing these things, is to first get off the gluten, get off the dairy. And these can be very, very difficult. so especially if you're in the US, where we basically our diets revolve around, milk and grains and bread. And so what can we do? How can we make this easier? I know that we struggled for this for quite a while. When my child was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, we had to do the same thing. It's, we see this not only just like I said in the autism, but pretty much across the board in any chronic illness. So this is a huge challenge for us because my child, that was pretty much all that he ate was pasta, bread. We made all of our own, or most of all of our own, not all of, we primarily made all of our own bread, like we ground our own flour, so we would make most of these things ourselves. But that's all that he would eat was those kinds of things. And so changing over to eating things, everything but that was very difficult. So here's a few tips that we learned along the way that was extremely helpful for us and really were a lot of the game-changing tips. The first one is focusing on the food that we can eat rather than what we can't eat. We spent a while, focusing, we can't have gluten, we can't have the dairy, we can't have gluten. He wasn't so much of a big dairy fan. There was a few things that he liked, but that one was easier for us. But once we started focusing on, okay, hey, what are the things that we can eat? And we did that because we were experimenting with new foods. So these two things really completely catapulted us to a different level. So when I started, focusing on, okay, here's the things that we can have. Now let's go find what are some things that we can eat. So we got on Pinterest and I would type in the search terms of these are things that we can have and let my children decide what recipes are we going to try. Well, they are very daring and they like to be outrageous, crazy sometimes. And so they would try to find the most craziest recipes ever to see, hey, mom's never going to make this. And of course, I'm up for most anything. So of course I made it. And then they really started having fun. So it took about a month once we started implementing these tips here that we really transformed from, this very difficult time at the dinner table or any time when we were going to eat. There was a lot of, arguing going on and I'm not going to eat that. And just, that whole fussing and frustration. So implementing these things were huge for us. And then we started, we first started with eliminating, I think, the grains first and the gluten first. We did keep doing some dairy. So that's another thing is to look at, instead of doing both at once, well, then just do one of them. The dairy was easier because we would really eat a lot of dairy anyway. So we just kind of kept, okay, we're not really doing a lot of dairy. But once we got to where, okay, we are having fun here, then we transitioned to, okay, we're moving both of those. So just taking one of those at a time, a lot of times makes it a little bit easier. And I know how difficult it is for moms that we are juggling all of this and then, trying to remove all of these things. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. So if you can only do one, just do the one. Give yourself permission to say, hey, we're going to take this baby step right here. The next thing is getting support from others and communicating with others, saying, hey, you know what? This is my child's new dietary needs. This is what I need. Talking with family and friends, teachers, whoever's, going to be people that are going to be influencing in your child's life, communicate with them saying, hey, this is what it is that we need. And then also to plan ahead, where if we have to have any sort of social gatherings, we're going to be getting together with friends, making sure that we are planning ahead, not waiting for the last minute or going there like, oh, we can't eat anything because, there's nothing here that we can eat. So making sure that we are planning ahead really makes things so much easier. And doing this as a family. Whenever we're just doing this, for one child, this is another thing that we start off with just doing for my one son. Oh my goodness, it was so difficult because we had one meal for him, one meal for other child, and I would eat something, my husband would eat something. It was just like, this was not working. And so when we started making this as a family and doing this all together, it's a huge game changer. And I know that, sometimes like, our other child, even though he's a really super good trooper, I was like, well, why do I have to eat? I'm not the one that's sick. I don't need that. But all the food that we have is, we always now look at it as we are looking at food that's going to promote health. So whether you have a chronic disease or not, we still want food that promotes health because we don't want someone who's healthy and doing well to get to a chronic disease state. So doing it as a family is another one of those big game-changing tips that we can do to really help to move through and get off of the dairy and the gluten. The next thing is the gut bacteria imbalances, and this is one of the hot topics. We see this all over about probiotics. We've got to get our microbiome under control. What's going on with the flora? So what do we do? How do we get this one under control? So the first thing is we need to first focus on intentional eating. Getting our gut imbalances corrected is really more about the environment more so than what probiotic it is. I like to explain this often in my practice as, just let's think of it a desert. You can go throw grass seed on a desert all day long. It's not going to grow. You're just wasting your time, money, and energy putting that grass seed out there. So the same thing happens inside of our GI tract, that if we don't address the environment, it doesn't matter what probiotics we put in there. They're not going to have a long-term lasting effect. We're going to constantly keep putting probiotics. The goal is to create this nice environment, this nice, rich, lush environment that is self-sustaining through the food and lifestyle that we lead. And so the first thing that we can do is to focus on intentionally eating and avoid eating on the run. When we're eating on the run, we are in that stressful state. So we're diverting the blood flow from our GI tract to other areas of our body. And I don't mean it literally on the run, but that as well. But when we're constantly on the go, then our body is still in that similar state. It's not, when it perceives, whether it perceives it or it actually is, it's still going to be that sympathetic state. So we're going to be very intentional, just like with our vehicles, that we stop at the gas station to put in gas. We don't put in gas in our cars when we're driving down the interstate at 75 miles an hour. We don't go to a barber shop to put gas in our gas tanks. We go to a gas station. So the same with food. We need to be very, very intentional with what we eat and whenever we eat it. This can do amazing things for our GI tract. The next thing is diversity and variety. So when we're stuck on eating the same things, whether it's good foods or not so good foods, then that's going to determine the type of bugs in our body, in our belly. Because guess what? Their food primarily comes from the things that we put in our mouth. So if we're constantly putting in really high sugars, we're going to have bacteria that really like those kind of sugars. If we're only putting in meat, we're going to have a lot of meat-eating bacteria. If we're only putting in breads and grains, we're going to have a lot of bacteria that like those things. So we need a variety of foods and a diversity of foods, different types of foods, different colors of foods. Basically, we need to eat the rainbow daily. And I do have a Eat the Rainbow Daily sheet for checklists for kids, so reach out to me if you would like a copy of that, and I can get you the link to that copy. It's just a really, really fun way to make sure that we're eating different foods and getting variety of foods and see, well, how many different kinds of foods can I get for these different colors. The next one is the quality of foods. We want to really avoid anything that's really processed and with added sugar, even these things that are natural, like I just at the grocery store today. And I was going to pick up some nuts and berries, kind of like a trail mix. And so I look at it, it's like, oh, this is all natural. It's all natural. It's all organic. So I look at the label, and of course, there's like sugar. Like it had sugar on the berries, it had sugar on the cranberries, and I'm just like, okay, this is natural, but we don't want the added sugar. We don't want this processed stuff. The quality is really important. Again, I'll bring up our car illustration again. We don't put water in our gas tank. We make sure we have the best quality gas we put in our cars. We would never put cheap quality gas that we knew was tainted and expect our cars to run. Especially if we're wanting to have an optimal running car. We're wanting these, Lamborghini race car type bodies where our health is like top notch. We're going to make sure we have the best fuel, the best service, all that kind of stuff. So we need the same with our bodies. The next one is another huge game changer. This one is so vital. It's so simple. Doesn't cost anything. That is laughter at meals. This is something I put in every single one of my protocols. And this one is a totally one-size-fits-all protocol, at least for this part, is laughter. Laughter is so important because that's going to help us engage that parasympathetic state. And remember, that parasympathetic state is that peaceful, restful, digest state. It's going to get our body out of that fighting from a lion or running from a lion, that fight or flight with that stressful state. The super easy way to remember this is the sympathetic state is the stressful. They both start with the letter S. The parasympathetic state is that peaceful state. They both start with a P. So that's a simple way to remember the two of those. So laughter is going to get us out of that stressful state. And it just has the healing powers of it is something you cannot buy in the store. You cannot buy in a supplement. It's just not available outside of enjoying good old-fashioned laughter. And again, with the influencing your gut bacteria is making these changes as a family. Whenever we have others involved, it's just so much like that same adage of it takes a village to raise a child. That's the same thing. When we are doing these things together, when we have community, we have others, it makes things so much easier, and it taps back into that parasympathetic state. So, whether it's family or friends, find others you can connect with and make changes together. Next comes up is toxic exposures. And again, this one is a hot topic. We see toxins all around us. Any of those of us that are in the natural health movement, toxins are a big deal because our body has to deal with them. It has to process them, and it interrupts just the regular day-to-day energy that it takes for us just to be here and to do our normal daily life. We have toxins that our body has to deal with on a normal basis. If you had zero chemical exposure, zero toxin exposure, our body still has to detox on a daily basis just from eating food, just from our hormones. Our body has to detox the hormones that it makes. So once it makes the hormones, they do their job. Now our body has to get rid of those things. That's a detox process. It falls in the same pathways as our body detoxing from chemicals. And so when we start looking and realizing these pathways are connected, it makes a lot more sense why we have autism and there's a detox component. And our very own neurotransmitters could be causing a problem. We have these imbalances and they get out of whack. We have these extra added things in our detox pathways through chemical exposures, through EMFs, through the foods, the pesticides, and all of those kinds of things, molds, bacteria. That causes an extra layer of fighting on our immune system that it has to deal with. So what are some things that we can do to try to really lower the amount of toxic exposure that we have? First one is read the labels. Read the labels, read the labels. I don't care how many times you've bought that product, read the labels. Look for good, clean, natural cleaning products. But I'll go back first to the food, just like today. From the front, this looks like a great product. And I start reading the labels and I realize, oh, I'm not getting that. The same thing goes with, I don't know how many times we've bought fish, and it's really difficult to find fish, frozen fish, that doesn't have stuff in it, has some kind of, coloring in it or preservative in it. So I thought that we had, okay, this is the brand and this is the fish that we can get. And then my son started having problems and I'm like, why? This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Well, I happened to read the label and I'm like, oh my goodness. I had researched this and researched this and researched this. The labels change. So I now always read the labels. I don't care if I've bought that product 50 million times and I just bought it yesterday and it was fine. I'm going to read that label again because changes happen. So make sure you're reading the labels. For cleaning products, find things that are natural. Using things like vinegar, baking soda, essential oils. There's a lot of different things that we can use that are very natural for cleaning. These extra chemicals, the exposure in the air, we're going to breathe them in or we're contaminated through our skin. So make sure we're looking at those kinds of things. The next one is growing our own food. And I know this can be very difficult. We actually have something very difficult for our family. We live in East Texas where there's technically 3 growing seasons, which I was super excited when we moved here. So I'm like, oh my goodness, we can have a garden year round. This is going to be fantastic. But our house is surrounded by trees. We are in East Texas, and if you know East Texas, it's the deep piney woods where there's pine trees like crazy. I had no idea there was this kind of trees in Texas when we moved here. And so our property is surrounded on 3 sides by very, very, very tall pine trees. So we only get about 3 to 4 hours of sun a day, and that's between 12 and 3. And it's very difficult for us to grow anything. We finally got one of those garden towers or tower gardens. It's the composting one that has the worms in it. And we were able to grow things in the very top layer that did really, really well this year. So I understand that saying, oh, just grow your own foods sounds super easy, but I realize it's not always that easy. Even if you live in the East Texas with year-round growing, it's not always that easy. So do whatever you can, even if it's a little bit. And of course, getting organic, good quality foods where you can. Next one is avoiding EMFs. There's everything is wireless these days. The electronics, we have everything electronics, these smart electronics, supposedly smart electronics, I don't know how smart they are. But all of these things they contribute to our health. Our body has to deal with those things. That is nothing that it was designed to deal with and be barraged with so much of it that we are being barraged with on a daily basis. So, turning off the wireless, turning off your cellular, your data, all of those things can help lower the burden that our body has. Getting away from electronics, in the evening times before we go to bed, getting away from the lights and getting more in tune with the sun and look at the light. Hey, when it's dark out, we need to start getting ready for bed, not just let's go onto all these electronics. And then, you know what? It's not just chemicals that are toxic. Relationships can be very, very problematic. For the most part, this usually applies mostly to adults, but sometimes it happens to children as well. So if we are in relationships and in situations where there's a lot of tension and a lot of, unhealthy relationships, this impacts our health in astronomical ways. And so, getting where we are in healthy relationships can do so much for our health. I just can't express how much this, when there's stress going on, like in our family, if we have any kind of stress going on, and even if it's just, okay, we got too much activity, whatever the stress is, affects my son's health so much. I didn't realize how much truth there is to this when you hear, about the laughter and about the stress. It's huge. These are game-changing areas of improving our health. So, looking for that kind of an area and making sure that we're taking an account of what's going on here relationship-wise. Are there healthy relationships for my child? And then also checking for mold. Mold is a huge thing when it comes to autism and any of these sort of neurological imbalances. Is a lot of times there's a contributing mold factor. So one thing that you can do that's super easy is to get a dehumidifier. Now, this is not going to necessarily rid your house of mold, but it's going to make it so much more difficult for the mold to multiply. So it's sort of like, okay, we are changing the environment, making the environment adverse for the mold. Just like that desert, it's kind of the reverse cycle. We're trying to make a desert in our home so this mold cannot flourish. And so getting a dehumidifier, getting your house checked also, even if you think, what, I think it's fine, have it checked. And I can get you some links as well on that. Just reach out to me and I can get you some places where you can get that done very recently and get, really, really good information as to whether you really do have mold or not. Next is making sure that we are aware of everything we put into our body. Things such as folic acid. Folic acid disrupts our neurotransmitters. It disrupts that methylation pathway, which our neurotransmitters are dependent on a healthy methylation cycle. Folic acid attaches to the receptor sites, makes it basically impossible, or it takes up a lot of the receptor sites for the natural folate. Folic acid cannot become methyl. You cannot take folic acid that we have in our supplements, that we have in our foods. Our foods have been now fortified and enriched with folic acid. That cannot get methylated. So we aren't able to have things like CME that we need for our neurotransmitters. So all of these kinds of things, whatever it is we're putting into our bodies, things that we are injecting into our bodies, are we injecting vaccines? Are we injecting toxins into our body? Going past that first line of defense and kind of basically ambushing our body, those kinds of things are going to have a negative effect, especially if we have issues with our methylation cycle and with our detox cycle, where our body cannot get rid of those things. Now there's problems. So all of those kinds of things in the toxins, we've got to be making sure that we are looking at and correcting any of those areas where there happens to be a problem. So what do? We've got, these food allergies, and we think, okay, I've done these different diets, I've tried to do eliminations, but I'm still having problems. Or I thought that, I thought I've got these toxins removed, but we're still having problems. Like, we've done all those things you talked about, Selena, but there's something still we can't get a hold, we can't quite figure out. That's why I say, you really need to do testing, or that's where we need to think about what kind of testing is going on. There's so many things that we can do just with our diet and lifestyle to start with that can have transformative effects. But when you're doing those things, you're like, we're just not getting anywhere. We really need to be looking underneath the surface. So what I do, for food allergies, I do dietary antigen testing. And I'm a huge fan right now of the Dunwoody labs. There's a couple other labs. The ELISA, I think, is a really good test, but I have had really good success with Dunwoody labs. It checks for the IgG, IgE, IgM, different variety, both the sensitivities and the allergies responses. The complement, the CD3 or C3D complement. The other thing that you do for gut imbalances, a comprehensive stool test. This one here is a GI map that I use. For toxic exposures, I'm going to be looking at organic acid testing, and there's going to be some other testing potential as well. And then also, we have just the in-depth conventional basic labs we can get so much information out of that the conventional world says, oh, those things are normal. Well, we have to remember that their normal range is what is common. That doesn't mean that it's normal. You know, our children are all pretty much sick. That doesn't mean that it's normal for our children to have these, symptoms of things like the ADHD, diabetes, MS. All those things are not normal. That's not healthy. What else can we do? Genetics. So genetics is another one of these buzzwords lately, but we have to really scrutinize genetics because what's going on here with genetics? Genetics is another one of these buzzwords that we hear a lot about, and that is MTHFR. It's getting associated with, all sorts of different kinds of things. So what is that? This whole MTHFR, what is going on here? Well, yes, MTHFR does play a huge, huge role in things like autism and Aspergers. But guess what? Our genes are not our destiny. So while yes, MTHFR has this huge potential, and we see a lot of things going on with the MTHFR gene and the autism, that doesn't mean that it has to be that way. So there's so many things that we can do to change that and to influence our genes, and that's what the epigenetics is. So when you hear epigenetics, that's how we can turn on and off our genes. That's how we can support them, or how we can be working against our genes. So with MTHFR, what's going on here? The biggest thing here is nutrition, optimal nutrition in our health. Having the right food, which again, this is what goes back to that common sense. We don't put water in the gas tanks of our car, so why are we not putting good quality nutrition into our bodies? If we put bad quality nutrition, there's going to be a negative effect. In any other area of our life, we know if we put in cruddy materials, we're going to have a pretty cruddy output. So if we are not putting in optimal nutrition, then there's going to be compromised output. So the same thing happens in our gut. The next one is lifestyle. So lifestyle is so important because this is kind of how our body decides. Is it going to be in that sympathetic state? Is it in that parasympathetic state? What's going on? Are we constantly on the go? Is there a lot of stressors going on? Is there a lot of tension? Is it just never any downtime? And that also overflows into our environment. The environment is, again, pretty much everything around us. So if we have an environment that is an adverse environment, we're going to have adverse things, just like we have a stream that gets blocked up and it's no longer moving. What's going to happen to that once living stream? It's going to turn into this water area that's going to probably be stinky, have a lot of bugs, sludge. It's going to be kind of gross. But once you get that moving again, the life returns and it just becomes one that has all this vibrance and vitality. The same thing with us. So our environment, our lifestyle, all of those things work together and harmoniously to promote, hey, how are these genes going to work? So what do we do with this genetic testing? We hear all about like 23andMe. There's like a gazillion different genetic test companies out there now. It's another one of these buzzwords and these things we hear all the time. So the one thing I want to talk about on the genetic testing is first to, one, remember our genes are not our destiny. Yes, I do genetic testing. I'm a huge fan of genetic testing. It can give us a lot of great clues, especially whenever some of the other testing is like, okay, is there something we're missing? Or at least helps us to understand, okay, this is why this is a big problem because we have this potential roadblock. But a lot of the genetic testing is, or some of them, they sell out to the pharmaceuticals, and it's really about gathering information on us. And I'm a huge advocate of privacy, and I don't really care for that. The pharmaceutical companies are not out to make us healthier. They're out to suppress symptoms. And so I only use, right at the moment, Maximize Genetics. They have the most exceptional privacy of any of the genetic companies that I've seen thus far, and they have an amazing panel. So while 23andMe is very easy to get to, they just sold out to one of the pharmaceutical companies. And so just be aware of that. If that's something that's important to you, that's just something you should know and be aware of. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this role of nutrition, because we all know that, okay, we don't put water in the gas tank, but what is the good nutrition? I'm eating really good foods, but it's not getting us anywhere. And then what about supplementation, right? Because we hear about supplementation all the time of all the different supplements. So I'm going to go back to, we're going to start with here on supplementation. Again, food for the brain, they report many individuals with autism have low levels of certain vitamins and minerals, including zinc, magnesium, iron, B vitamins, especially like vitamin B6, B12, D, E, and folates. So I want to pause here because I want you guys to write this down, do a screenshot. Do whatever you got to do to look at these, to remember these. Zinc, magnesium, iron, vitamins B6, B12, D, E, and folates. So I hope you guys have those now. Now let's listen. We're gonna go through these supplements, but I want you to remember these, okay? So here's what the most common supplements that are told for those with autism, ADHD: melatonin, omega-3 fatty acids, multivitamins, B12 injections, probiotics, and vitamin D. So where do we start? Which one do we start with? Okay, so let me tell you my thought process in these, and this will help you know a little bit more on where it is you should start. So melatonin. So my first question is, what is melatonin? Where does it come from? Does our body make it? How does it make it? What are the pathways involved? So melatonin is part of the tryptophan pathway, and how it works is a very short and condensed version of it. Tryptophan goes either over to the quinolic acid pathway or over to this 5-HTP. 5-HTP gets converted down to serotonin and then to melatonin. Okay, so the way these things go, though, there's these conversion processes. So you need BH4 is one of the things you need for tryptophan to go over there to 5-HTP. Well, BH4, guess what? It comes from the methylation cycle. Okay, next we're going to need B6 for 5-HTP to get down to serotonin, and then we need SAMe from the methylation cycle again to get to melatonin. So do you guys see anything here? B6, interesting. They're low on B6, so let's supplement with melatonin. So what happens then? Well, first my question is, why is there a problem with melatonin? And what happens if we replace the end product of that pathway? So, well, first off, we know there's probably a B6 deficiency. So guess what? Probably why there's a melatonin deficiency. So giving melatonin, is that going to help solve the real root cause? No, it doesn't. It's another symptom management approach. These are approaches that I don't take. I am not a fan of supplementing with melatonin, especially in our children, but pretty much across the board. If it is, it's going to be very, very short term, but not for something like this, especially when we know that there's going to more than likely be a known deficiency in things that are upstream in this pathway. So we're going to go back upstream here. Okay. The next thing here, so we see that there's these other side of the equation here. That tryptophan can also go where? Over this quinolic acid. It's an excitotoxin. And just think excitatory, excited, right? This is going to be that excitatory type responses, and this will be a very damaging response. The chitinine pathway can be very protective. If it gets to that quinolic acid, especially if it gets out of balance, we're going to have some issues here. And especially when it comes to our neurotransmitters, things like autism, anxiety, ADD, those kinds of different behaviors. So what causes, what shifts the body, what puts it over that tryptophan over to the other side? Well, stress is a huge mediator that's going to shift things from that melatonin side over to that other pathway. Now, there is some protection on that pathway. There's some reasons that our body is doing that. That chitinine pathway is very, very protective. So our body is doing it for a reason. But we have to remember, go back to when it goes on going, that's when it gets problematic. So let's look at on this back on that other side. So we have stress can shift it over. That's why stress is so important that I mentioned earlier. But let's look back over on that tryptophan, the melatonin side. We've got the methylation cycle twice here. This is two processes that methylation cycle is needed for that to get to that melatonin. So let's go look at a little bit bigger picture here of the methylation cycle here. Okay. So this again is a very, very simplified version. So over on the far left, we have our methionine cycle. And then we have next to it, we have that folate cycle. And then you'll see there circled is that MTHFR gene. Okay, so the MTHFR gene kind of goes in that folate cycle, which goes to that methionine, which is like that methylation cycle over there. And it also goes over here to this, our neurotransmitters. So it's kind of like a junction for both of these processes. The thing's making more sense now, right? So if the SAMe, if our MTHFR gene is not working so well or we have deficiencies, the first question we're going to ask is that why is the MTHFR gene working so well, or what's going on in this pathway? So there's obviously the SNPs that we can have, which we hear about, but you know what? There's also ways that that gene can be slowed down. If we have a perfectly fine gene, things can actually slow it down. And one of the biggest offenders that we have right now is folic acid. Nearly all of our foods are fortified with folic acid. So that's why when you have these processed foods, you're going to get folic acid. And why is that important? One is it can't methylate. Two is it attaches to some of these receptors, and it has an affinity for these receptors that's going to slow down this process. So now we have made a potentially perfectly fine gene, fine pathway, we've now diminished it. So if we have a SNP, this really, really compounds the issues. So now we're left with, we can't detox. If we can't methylate folic acid, if we can't methylate folate, then all these other processes are going to go downstream. So let's go back to the SAMe. We have SAMe gets made over there on that far, far left. There's over 200 processes in our body that's dependent on SAMe. So this is why you hear the MTHFR. Well, yeah, because it goes back to that. Because if that site, if the MTHFR is not working, then guess what? All those other things down on either side of those are not going to work. So that's kind of how it comes connected to those. Okay, so look over on the right-hand side is where we have our melatonin that we talked about that needed SAMe. Well, then also down here at the bottom, SAMe, that's our dopamine pathway. And again, that dopamine is one of those excitatory neurotransmitters. So if we don't have the SAMe, we cannot clear out our dopamine. Okay, if we don't have the SAMe, we're not going to have melatonin. That melatonin is what makes us sleepy. We're not going to have that. Okay, those things are going to get backed up. So guess what else? This even gets more exciting here. Guess what else these need? Zinc, magnesium, and B6. What did we just write down about 5 minutes ago? Deficiencies in zinc, magnesium, B6, right? So does it make sense that, oh, well, of course, if they're deficient in that, these pathways are not going to work. So supplementing at the end of the pathways does not go to the root cause, okay? So my approach is, okay, what are the cofactors involved here? Well, here, all these circles here, this is where the B6 is needed. We need B6 for the melatonin. We need B6 all across the board here from the tyrosine pathway. You know, the dopamine pathway. We need B6 over here on that, you see that far left bottom? That's our detoxing pathway. We need B6 to come out to get that homocysteine down through there to glutathione so we can detox the heavy metals, we can detox our hormones. So B6 is another huge, huge component. So giving melatonin, again, does not fix the real root cause. And the real issue here is we've got to fix why there's some deficiencies and why things are not working well. So let's go back here and look at our melatonin pathway. So we have BH4, that methylation cycle needs both zinc and magnesium for it to work right. That 5-HTP needs the B6. Serotonin needs zinc and magnesium to work right. And then what do? We've got to fix that. We've got to get to the root cause as to why. So if we just get the melatonin, then guess what happens? We back up that pathway. Our body says, oh, we don't need to make these things. So then what's it going to do with that tryptophan? Where's it going to send it to? So it doesn't need to go here. It's going to send it on the other side. Okay, we're going to have issues. We're going to have a lot of serotonin, and if we have a lot of serotonin, guess what that does? It slows down our dopamine pathway. So it's going to have these counteractive effects of it's just going to cause problems. So I encourage you to go to PubMed if you want to know more about these things or look at more of the research. There's so much information. We know all these things. It's one of my biggest frustrations with the conventional medicine world is that the studies are out there. We have the information. Just the conventional approach is not about chronic illnesses. It's about immediate. It's about emergent care. And so acute care. So it doesn't, it's not applying these things to these chronic situations. So go put in PubMed and type in these terms. Any combination of these terms here, autism and the chironine, autism and tryptophan, autism and quinolic acid. You'll be amazed at the connections that you will see. That chironine pathway in autism spectrum disorders it's very well known that that's a huge contributor that's going on in those with autism. But now it makes perfect sense why, right? So what can you do? So one of the ways you can find out the sort of the status on these neurotransmitters. There's not a way we can actually go measure the neurotransmitters, but it's an organic acid can give us the metabolites. So we have an idea of, okay, what's going on here? How are these things working? So an organic acid test is where we usually start in the functional and naturopathic holistic type world if we're going to look at what's going on biochemically here, and that's an organic acid test. We always have to continue to ask the question, why? Okay, so let's move on to B12. Again, we have to ask why. Why is there a problem with B12? Well, that goes back to that MTHFR gene. So what's going on here? You know, what's in this cycles? Where are things backed up at? Because if we have too much of one thing, it will back up some of these pathways. They say, hey, we don't need any more. We need to slow down processes. Well, if these cycles are not all working harmoniously together, one of them gets backed up, others are going to get backed up. And we're going to have deficiencies, or we're going to have, you know, really high elevations. And so we have to ask why, what, and how. Okay, and the same thing goes on with all the rest of these other supplements, whether it's melatonin, omega-3 fatty acids, these multivitamins. You know, I'm going to say, hey, first, what's going on? You know, what are some cofactors going on in the diet? Because there's a reason that we are having the symptoms manifest in this way. And while they may be deficiencies, there may be true deficiencies, usually if we keep peeling back the layers and we keep digging deeper, we can get to the real true root cause. And while we, yes, absolutely, we may need to do some vitamin supplements, very short term to get our body out of the negative into the positive. This isn't that, oh, I've got autism or I have MTHFR, now I'm stuck taking this methylated vitamin for the rest of my life. No, that's not how it works. And so, you know, that's not a true holistic practitioner that's going to say, okay, this is what you got this diagnosis. This is what you're going to take the rest of your life. That's not, it doesn't work that way. So, you know, omega-3 fatty acids can be very, very problematic for those who have pyroluria. So I'm going to be looking at, do you have pyroluria? Pyrolurics also typically have zinc deficiencies. And so a lot of these things overlap with one another. Are there genetic SNPs going on here that make it more difficult for these omega-3 fatty acids or omega-6 fatty acids? So we're going to be looking at upstream before I ever recommend any sort of supplements. Multivitamins, you know, we first have to make sure we have good dietary intake. Supplements, the name is supplementing. So we have to have the foundation. You know, are there genetic SNPs as to why some of these things are not working so well? And also, is there a stress going on? Because the stress is going to stop our body from absorbing those really awesome, fantastic foods that we're putting into our body. If we have stress, it doesn't going to matter if it's a supplement or if it's really good foods, we're not going to get it. So we have to address those core foundation things first before we start taking these things. And I don't take these things randomly, and I don't take them long term. The B12 injections, again, you know, while these may be warranted in certain situations, this is not my go-to. I'm going to be looking at upstream. Really, okay, stomach acid is a huge thing with B12 when there's a B12 imbalance, because we've got to have adequate stomach acid for our body to absorb the B12. And so then we're going to start looking at, okay, if there's a stomach acid imbalance, is there H. pylori? Because H. pylori is notorious for messing with our stomach acid levels. You know, whether it's, you know, at a certain stage it elevates it, at another stage it's lower. And so what's going on here? You know, why is there a problem? So unless I know the reason why, and that reason why really truly warrants these supplementations, I don't do those supplements. You know, I'm a pretty anti-supplement person. I'm very specific as to when I do them, especially when it comes to our children. We've got to be very careful because our body has so many things going on. So we're going to move from the supplementation. Now that I, you know, gave that breakdown, I warned you guys that I wasn't going to give you, say, hey, here's the supplements you need to take. And I hope you understand my reasoning and my thought process behind it. And if you want to know more, reach out to me. You know, I love connecting with others who really understand and like to get to say, hey, how can we dig deeper? How can we find out why? So we're going to move on to autism and exercise. You know, exercise is so important, whether it's autism or any other sort of condition that we have been labeled with. You know, and the reason for it is because activity affects our neurotransmitters and it affects all of our other hormone balances. You know, there's a number of studies that report exercise, you know, helps to reduce anxiety, depression, and reaction time in our sleep disorders. But again, you just saw some of those pathways, that quick overview, that biochemistry type pathways. You know, it really makes perfect sense, right? So let's look at it here. We've got these pathways, that whole methylation cycle. Well, over there on that dopamine, when we exercise and we're doing these things, it helps these things to move. It helps to support these cycles all working in harmony, especially over here on this right. There's dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, all that pathway. the tyrosine pathway. Those things are really, really important when it comes to exercise, and it's whether we clear things out, we can help clear out those hormones, or if sometimes we're doing too much. So we have to make sure that the activity is appropriate, and sometimes more is not better, and the timing of our activity is extremely important. So I encourage you to take note as to how your child reacts to activity that happens earlier in the day versus if they have it at nighttime. How does that affect their sleep? How does it affect bedtime? When it comes to bedtime, is there a lot more struggles, versus one or the other? They have a lot of activity in the morning, they just at nighttime they struggle, or is it at nighttime if they have a lot of activity, that's when they struggle? So pay attention to those little clues that our body gives us and that your child's body has given you to see, hey, is the activity they're getting the type of activity that their body needs to promote health? There's so many different types of exercises that are, being hailed as, oh, this is what you need to do, that's what you need to do. So a lot of the traditional therapies tend to lack the physical activity, and they focus more on the tabletop, sitting at a desk and working on these different various, fine motor skill type things. But music and movement has been gaining a lot of popularity. This is something that we absolutely loved as a family. My children started music and movement classes when they were very, very small infants. I'm a huge fan of this, and so it's really nice to have the science behind it as well. That when we go to look at these things, like when we're promoting those as a health, that there really is a lot more to it just than a preference. It's a great way to get kids moving, where they can play with instruments, they can dance to songs, storytelling. All of those things help to improve socialization, help strengthen different parts of the brain. There's so many things that connect the neurotransmitters in the brain with the music and movement. And when they look at children, there was actually a study where they looked at children, and at the end they talked more with other children and showed fewer negative behaviors in these music and movement classes. The Chinese art of Zhang, which I'm more than likely not pronouncing properly, was used in a study as a form of specialized exercise for children with autism. And it helps to build the body's awareness through slow, focused movements, and it can help children with them gain self-control and the ability to resist impulses in the face of temptation. So it kind of gives them a way to, take control of the situation. In general, we really can't say, okay, what movement's going to be the best form of movement or what activity, but one of the things we can do is make sure we're starting at a young age. So this pretty much goes across the board. This is kind of one of the one-size-fits-all, parts of a protocol is, when we starting young, we're helping to form that foundation. Using gentle coaching strategies and trying to break things down into smaller steps and including illustrations until there's a comfort level reached. And really this goes pretty much with those with autism and without. This is just sort of a general rule that really applies to pretty much everyone. When we take these nice, compassionate approaches, it's amazing how others respond. And so when people are having more of a challenge in those neurotransmitter pathways, and we take those gentler approaches, it makes it so much easier for them. You don't have to have this other thing they have to overcome when we are adding stress to their body, which already is challenged. So mindfulness is another one of these latest buzzwords of, meditation, being mindful. And so does this help with autism? Absolutely. So again, there's research out there on these things. You can go to PubMed and just type in these things, and you would just be amazed at how much we actually know from a scientific standpoint. But the mindfulness approach is often defined as a mind-body based approach that helps those change the way that they are thinking and feeling about their experiences, especially when they're in a stressful situation. So we are very intentional whenever we eat. Whenever we have stresses, we also need to be very intentional with how we handle those stresses. And that doesn't mean that we ignore them. So there was a stressful situation that I had a few weeks ago, personally, and we need to make sure that we are allowing ourselves to experience that, because if we trap those things inside of us, that's when it becomes problematic. And we have that body where that lion gets trapped inside of us, and our body is still trying to escape it, even though we're trying to ignore it, or we think, oh, I've dealt with it. So we got to make sure that we are dealing with these things and experiencing these things in a very helpful way. And so mindfulness is, not necessarily ignoring those things, but we got to make sure that we are looking at the entire spectrum of what we are dealing with, and give ourselves tools that we can move through those stressful situations in ways that we can empower our body during those stressful times. So that's where the mindfulness, doing that. So there's some simple mindful practices that we can do, and that is things like listening to a bell exercise is one of the ones we hear a lot about. So you just have your child close their eyes and listen to the vibrations of a bell, and ask them to raise their hand once they no longer hear the bell, and then listen to the sounds around them. Those mindful walks through the neighborhood or through the woods or a park can be done with your child, where you simply just walk and let your child report back, okay, what are some of the noises that you hear? Was it the birds chirping? What are some of the feelings you felt? Did you feel the cool air, the wind, the breeze? Or the East Texas, the warm air, the hot breeze, the humidity, the water dripping off my face because it's so humid outside. You can also make a glitter jar. This I think is fun for anybody. Like this here is like one of my favorites. You can get glitter and some baby oil and water and put it in a jar. It's very much like a snow globe, making a snow globe. And these are like, I love this activity. And it helps to, especially like whenever there's a stressful day, letting the child just like shake it up and just focus on that, giving them something to focus on while it settles. There's just a lot of different, things that you can do to kind of help redirect and to help support, not just redirect us to change the course, but it's going to actually help support those neurotransmitters which are out of balance. We got to tap into that body and get tapped into those. So how can we then move on to detoxing? Children with autism can often build up a huge amount of toxicity from exposure to chemicals and metals and environmental poisons, as well as things from the internal, like bacterial and viral infections and things like candida. They're more susceptible to oxidative damage and environmental toxins. Why? That's the question that I ask. Why is that? But I know that you guys know the answer because we just covered it, right? The methylation cycle. It goes back to that methylation cycle. That B6, magnesium, zinc, selenium, okay? Those things are needed for that detox cycle to work. So we know these kids are deficient in those things, right? So the detox cycle is not going to work. So what's going to happen if we don't have glutathione going on? If we don't have that glutathione recycling going on, we don't have that glutathione where we can get rid of toxins, where are the toxins going to go? They're going to build up, okay? So all of these things actually start making sense when we just know a little bit more of the pieces going on behind here. So here we're going to look at this pathway just a little bit more because we brushed over it really, really quick earlier. So we have here on the left that methionine, that methylation cycle pathways here. It's going, we got that methionine, goes to the CME, comes around, we make homocysteine, which actually ends up going either back up to methionine and it keeps circling around, or the homocysteine, the way it gets eliminated out of the body is down through the transsulfuration pathway, the detox pathway down through glutathione. So we got to have B6 is a big thing that we need from that homocysteine to go down that pathway. We need B6. We're going to need magnesium. We're going to need zinc. We're going to need selenium. And where do we start? We don't go out and buy those supplements. We got to first start with the foods that are rich in those things first. Then we can supplement when needed. So what are some of these best foods that we can eat? So what are some of the best detoxing foods, especially that we can eat? I don't know how many different 10-day detox plans there are out there. We're going to discuss some of the best known detox foods that there are that you can incorporate on a daily basis. And again, we want to make sure that we have variety. So don't get stuck on, oh, we're going to have a bunch of this, we're going to have a bunch of that. And also remember that just because these are great detox foods, and that doesn't mean that your body, your child's body is not going to have a reaction to this. We've got to also put them into context and look at saying, hey, what's going on for my child? Is this going to be problematic for my child? And don't just take it just because it's supposed to be a great food for you or your child. But here's a list. Cruciferous vegetables, things like broccoli, kale, collards, Brussels sprouts, and cauliflower. Those are some great ways to get some good detoxing. Those are a lot of the ones that our children don't like. And there's actually some genetics into that. So if you really get into some of the deep genetics, there are certain genes where we don't really take care for the taste of those. And some of them where we are blood types. Some of those are different blood types that don't really do so well. But anyway, so then freshly made vegetable juices. So I'm a huge fan of juicing, but there's a caveat and nuance to that. We've got to be very careful. Like less is usually best in the juicing because juicing is very concentrated. Plus, we're taking out the fiber. So I prefer to juice and then add the pulp back in because I want the fiber with it. But I really want to make sure that things are broken down. It makes it much easier to get a lot of the nutrients out of it juiced first. But things that we can juice with are like celery, cilantro, parsley, ginger, Celery may also increase urine flow and aid in detoxing. And cilantro may help remove heavy metals. So sometimes we gotta be careful. We don't want to overdo it on those. But those are like fantastic ways to help support your body and also bring in some really good nutrients. There's herbal detox teas, which are, again, fantastic. Burdock root, dandelion root, ginger root, licorice root, sarsaparilla root, cardamom, and cinnamon bark. Again, don't just go out and buy these just because, oh, these are great detox teas. There's always, pathways that are involved. We don't want to overload any pathways. So even if things are herbals, we can still overdo it with herbals. But these are all, these are some great ways on a daily basis to get different varieties of these, making sure that we are changing up and getting variety is the biggest takeaway here. Bioflavonoids, things that are found in grapes and berries and citrus fruits. These just have so many things besides detoxing. They help to, there's a lot of things in grapes that can help with circulation. So we're going to help to, we need good circulation to get things out of the body. Rosemary is something that's really awesome. It contains carnosol, which is a potent booster of the detoxification enzymes. So we see a lot of great things with rosemary. But again, I've also seen things that are problematic. So just because this is great doesn't mean you just need to go around and get it. But it's a great potential. We can use a lot of these things just for seasonings in our foods. We can use them, not necessarily we're taking them therapeutically, but just incorporating these into our diet can just do so many wonderful, wonderful things. Turmeric is another one that we hear a lot about. I'm not a fan of the curcumin. I'm a bigger fan. I pretty much promote whole foods. I don't like pulling out just different pieces and different properties of the herbs and foods for therapeutic reasons. I'm more of a big fan of turmeric, but again, turmeric can also be problematic. I see a lot of people that have problems with turmeric, so that one I'm usually very cautious with, especially if there's autoimmunity going on. But it's super rich and has great anti-inflammatory properties. So if you can find ways to incorporate these things into foods, into smoothies, making different sauces and, blending some of these up in them are just some wonderful ways to help to support that detox pathway naturally in the body. So we've covered a ton of stuff today. So where do we go from here, right? So first off, I want to congratulate you for being here today and making it through this. There was a lot of stuff we covered, and for where you're heading. I'm super excited for you because if you're on this journey, your child's health is going to transform. I mean, we can't not help our children get better whenever we are changing the way that we are approaching health, when we're doing things differently and saying, okay, we're going to take responsibility, we're going to look at things naturally. It's going to have this amazing impact. So, the first things that we do, how do we do this? How do we do this natural health thing? Well, first, identify opportunities to improve. We're going to look at stress reduction. This one is huge and it's a game changer. You can do everything else right, have everything else perfect. If you don't have stress, all the stress is identified and those things under control, the other stuff is not going to work to the full potential. And a lot of it is just kind of a waste. So this one is a game changer. It's at the beginning and it's at the end. So that one is huge. And looking at everything that contributes to stress. So that's going to be from foods to relationships to chemicals, or the whole gamut. I know that was a huge one. It can be very difficult. So that's a big one, is stress. Next one is looking at, okay, the type of foods, like the quality and the quantity of our foods, the diversity of our foods. Looking for opportunities there as to what can we do, where do we have things that we can improve on. Activity, and again, sometimes less is best. Looking at the times of day, times of days work better for my child. Is it just a couple times a week, or every day just too much for my child? Making sure that we are making sure it's the right amount of activity for your child. And then testing from a functional health perspective. We want to be looking at things functionally, not looking at them from an acute situation where, by the time most labs are out of normal in the conventional sense, things are so far gone. There were so many warning lights that we could have stopped, we could have done something. So if we look at them from a functional perspective, there's so many things that we can do, and there's so many things that we can transform. So I have a sheet for you that helps you to write these things down, helps you to compile these things, and helps to kind of, give you a checklist or give you a little bit of direction to say, okay, looking at these different points of things that we're looking at, like the sleep, what kind of quality and quantity of sleep, is there stress? Is there mold? All these different things. Are ways you can start putting together your strategy. You got to first say, okay, where are we at? What are the pieces that we're dealing with? And then we can decide, okay, what do we need to do to put these pieces together to make the picture that I'm wanting? So that's the next thing that I have is, okay, we've identified the opportunities. So now what is our strategy for improving sleep? We realize that, oh, you know what? Yeah, we're not getting to bed till like 10 o'clock, 10:30. It's all crazy. The sleep, we have to get up like super early, like at 5 or 6 in the morning. And so my child's just not getting enough sleep. Okay, well, what's our strategy now to fix that? What are we going to do to improve that? And so that's the second page of my strategy guide is to now we're going to say, here's how we're going to improve those things. The next thing that I have for you all is my eat a rainbow every day, because that food quality and food diversity is so important. I mean, it helps us just a different variety of nutrients, but then it's going to help us with our microbiome. So just kind of think of it as if we were at a big airport, right? And all we had were ticket agents. That's it. Where's the pilots? Where's the bad guys? The guys check our bags. Where's people that are going to, fuel the airplane? If all we have is ticket agents, we're not going to get very far at the airport. So we need a variety. We need everyone at the airport that makes the airport work. We need the people that are helping on the shuttle buses. We need the people that are the mechanics on the airplanes. We need the pilots. We need the stewardess. We need the people at the gates. We need all these different employees there, not just ticket agents. And so the same with our food. We've got to have a variety so that we have a variety of different kinds of bugs in our bellies. And so this rainbow chart is a really fun way to start getting the different diversity on that. After that, then we have the testing. So where do we start on this testing? What do we do here? We've got food allergies and food sensitivity testing. I'm a big fan of the Dunwoody Labs. Like I said earlier, they have a dietary antigen test. So this is going to help us to really hone in on what are some of those food sensitivities that we're having. A lot of times these sensitivities, they don't show up right away. So it's hard to pinpoint on these elimination diets as to what's really causing our reactions. So if you can go through that yo-yo of trying this diet, eliminating this, eliminating that, you just can't really pinpoint what these triggers are. Food sensitivity testing and allergy testing can be a huge, huge benefit to narrowing those things down. The next thing that we look at are the gut bacteria and toxin imbalances in the GI tract. So I usually start with the GI map from Diagnostic Solutions, and the reason for that is that it's going to give me a really much broader base of the DNA technology. There's GI effects from Genova, which is also a DNA PCR-based technology, but they also incorporate some culturing based in their test and the results. So some of the results, are going to be based on the culture, and the culture can be so unreliable. There's a couple reasons for that. The first one is a lot of the bacteria don't do so well in an oxygenated environment. So they're not going to reproduce very well. They're not going to grow. The second thing is sometimes they die and they're not in a state what's coming out in the bowels that can't reproduce. And so you're going to have a lot of false negatives or potential false negatives if you have a culture-based test. So that's why I really like the GI map, because we're going to get, it doesn't matter if that microbe, the pathogen, whatever it is, happens to die or is not able to grow in oxygen, we're going to see it because we're going to be checking the DNA. The other thing on the bacteria and imbalances and toxins, and this also goes with neurotransmitters, is an organic acids test. And that's typically referred to as an OAT test. I like to use Great Plains Laboratory. Genova also has a really good OAT test as well. But I do prefer the Great Plains over those two. And so with the OAT test, we're going to be looking at the metabolites of the things that are going to affect these neurotransmitter pathways, like that methylation cycle, the B vitamins. And we're also going to get some big clues as what's going on bacteria-wise. A lot of things that OAT is going to pick up things that are more in the small intestine, where the GI test is going to be more the lower end of the GI tract. And so, we have, long-term issues with things like with yeast, especially. We're going to find more evidence of that on an OAT test. So getting both of these are going to really help give you a really, really big in-depth picture of what's going on in that GI tract. And then also what I really like is a genetic test. The genetic test doesn't really tell us that, okay, you've got these genes, this is the problem, but it gives us a warning saying, hey, we've got potential speed bumps here that we need to be aware of. And we may need to navigate these particular areas a little bit differently than if someone didn't have those speed bumps. And so we don't necessarily make all of our clinical decisions and our protocols based on, oh, you have this MTHFR SNP, that means you're going to have XYZ supplement. We just take it as to, hey, this is a little bit more information, a little bit more picture to what our real, true big puzzle looks like. And again, I use Maximize Genetics. I especially love their exceptional privacy policy, and they have a really, really nice panel that is extensive into the methylation, detox, and nutritional SNPs and those pathways. So it gives us a really good picture of what's going on. And they're getting ready to expand and do another even larger test, but I don't have the details on that one yet. But the one that they have now, I'm very happy with, and I've been very pleased with. And then, of course, our in-depth basic labs. There's so many clues that we can get from some of these simple labs that our doctors are ordering, of course, on a regular basis. And so when we look at them, though, the key to that is looking at them from a functional perspective. So how do we do that? Well, I've got another reference guide for you all here. And this just kind of gives you an overview of some of the most common basic labs that you can get. They're usually pretty easy to get if you just request them. You know, some of these labs doctors are a little hesitant on, but most of these, you ask for them, they'll find ways for you to get them. The CBC with differential absolute sonophyll count, B12, vitamin D, there's a whole list here of things to look at, and we can put them into context to the bigger picture. So don't go out and get these tests and have some elevations or deficiencies and also start getting supplements for those. That's not how we put them in a functional perspective. That's not the way we approach things functionally and holistically. We got to put them into context, especially things with the vitamin D. So vitamin D supplements, we have the unsulfured and sulfured issue, because with the natural vitamin D is very different than even the vitamin D3 that you're going to get in the stores. Basically, the second part of that vitamin D conversion process. And so all of these things give us another great clues and can very easy to get. So that pretty much, if you have any questions on any of those, just message me at info@thefunctionalperspective.com and I will try to get back to you. So reach out to me for any of these kinds of these resources, and you are always welcome to connect with me. I offer a complimentary discovery consultation that you can visit or get that by visiting thefunctionalperspective.com/schedule. That's thefunctionalperspective.com/schedule. And I have a mom's Facebook group. This is for moms and women who are wanting to take charge of digestive health. And you can find that on Facebook of it's Moms Taking Charge of Digestive Health, but it's the Taking Charge of Health is the little tagline after. And then also I have coming up is I will be speaking at Heal Your Child Summit in September, the end of this month or towards the latter part of this month. I'll be talking about building a microbiome that promotes healing. As these pesky bugs that we have are cute critters. And so you can join me for that, and please help spread the word on this. This is a free summit. It's available to anybody. And there's, I think, 20-something speakers that are going to be at it. And we're going to have a ton of tools to help you guys, equip you guys to help you move forward in healing your child. The host on this is on a mission to equip others to say, hey, we've got to take charge of our health. This train wreck is crazy that it's on right now. Our children's health is tanking, and us parents have to do something about it. But you know what? We can do nothing about it unless we are equipped. And so the practitioners are involved. Like, we are trying to equip you guys so you guys can be successful in this amazing mission that you guys are on. Join me on that, and you can go to healyourchildsummit.com for that. And then also be on the lookout. I am going to be having other presentations coming up. Essential Oils 101, combating autoimmunity naturally and taking the toxic out of cleaning. If you are in East Texas, we are going to be having a children's Building Your Microbiome series going on here in East Texas, as well as we're going to have an adult series on Hacking Your Health series. So if you happen to be in East Texas, make sure you guys are on the alert for that. Follow me on Facebook, The Functional Perspective, to make sure that you are getting the alerts for when these events are happening. They're going to be starting later on this fall into next spring. That's it for now. Again, congratulations. It was great seeing you guys here today, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Take care.